And welcome to the Board of County Commissioners agenda setting work session for Tuesday, September 17th. I'm John Hutchings, the chair of the board. To my left is Gary Edwards, the vice chair, and to my right is Commissioner Ty Menser. And over here is the county manager, Ramiro Chavez. And we have Thomasina Cooper here, Ty Menser's executive aide, La Bonita Bomar, clerk of the board. Robin Courts is over here and as the clerk of the executive, everybody. And Neil, what's your last name? Shea. That's correct, Neil Shea.
He's the production manager for today.
What's that?
He's the production manager.
The production manager for today, okay. So thank you, and we're going to go through the agenda for this afternoon, our BoCC meeting for September 17th. Then we will review the draft agenda for next Tuesday, the 24th of September. Then we'll get into all the other agenda items here before noon. So we'll begin with calling the meeting to order at 2 o'clock and the Pledge of Allegiance led by Vice Chair Commissioner Edwards. And then we'll do an approval, allegedly approval of the agenda for this afternoon and the meeting minutes from September 10th. Then we will have the opportunity for the public to address the board and move right into the county manager's update.
I really don't have any updates for you commissioners that I will provide this afternoon. I will highlight an award the county received from the City County Communications and Marketing Association. And we received a silver award related to our YouTube. It's our the best YouTube when we streamline these meetings. So kudos to the PIOs and kudos to the county on this award.
Wow, that's kind of cool. That comes from what agency?
This is from the City County Communications and Marketing Association.
Oh, very nice.
It's a national association.
That's pretty cool. Questions or comments?
Are you going to do any follow-up or response to the testimony we had about unpermitted activities by the Faith, Health, whatever they're called?
The only update that I can probably provide is we have forwarded all that information to our code compliance. That's an ongoing issue that it will be premature, difficult for me to get to an answer this afternoon. It's a very complex set of violations, and the staff is going through the process and exercising any actions they may take, but yeah. And in fact, they do have a hearing examiner's hearing on their proposal here in the next month or so. But I can certainly express that if you like this afternoon, just to make sure I follow up on it, if you like.
It'd probably be worth it.
Okay.
Because there was, a very detailed testimony given from one of the neighbors.
Yeah, and provided, yeah. Okay, I'll do that.
Just so they know that we're addressing it.
Okay. That takes us to agenda item number 3, the consent items A and B. The first one is a public works resolution.
Is that revision, Commissioners, consent items A through D, as David. We'll revise that for this afternoon.
Oh, I see that now. Thank you. So the first one is a reclass of a position in Public Works.
You reviewed this item last week, Commissioners. This is a request from Public Works to reclassify a full-time accounting assistant 3 to an accounting assistant 4. They have gone through the process, as you may know. Public Works has a very complex timekeeping system because their business includes grants and everything needs to be recorded and tracked so we can provide enough billing to the grantors, both the state and federal. And as we move forward on the ERP, the enterprise system, it will require yet additional set of skills. So this particular proposal is an attempt to address the additional responsibilities it will be required by staff in the future. This action will change the salary from $5,257 a month to $5,795 a month. That will be a $538 a month, or 10% increase. And this is going to be covered by both the road fund and the solid waste fund. There's no impacts to the general fund. And at this point, the department is not requesting a budget increase or budget change. Any questions?
Any questions?
No.
Okay, takes care of that, thank you. And 3B is an appointment to the Agritourism Committee.
Yes, you discussed this particular reappointment last week, and this is for you to consider taking a formal action to appoint Mr. George Sharp to the Agritourism Advisory Committee, and this is a reappointment. And this will be for a term that will end on September 17, 2021.
Questions, comments? Good? Okay. Then 3C is an appointment to the Storm and Surface Water Advisory Board.
Yeah, this is also a reappointment of Ms. Phyllis Farrell to the Storm and Surface Water Advisory Board. And this is a representative for District 1. You discussed this appointment last week. And this is, again, for you to take a formal action on appointing Ms. Phyllis Farrell for this committee. And the appointment will go from October 18, 2019, ending on October 18, 2022.
Nope, anything okay?
Good.
All right. And then the auditor's financial report.
Yeah, that's your weekly
Trust my
voucher
seatmates
list.
have. Any issues would come up? Any questions about it? Okay. It moves us to agenda item number 4, department items. The first one is PHSS, that's Public Health Social Services, DD Community Project Grant.
Yeah, you reviewed this item last week, Commissioners, and this is related to for you to consider issuing a request for proposals for services, programs, and community outreach that benefit and promote conditions in the community that supports the health and well-being of individuals with developmental disabilities and their families. The RFP provides for up to $375,000 that will come from the Thurston County Millage Fund, and there's a contribution by Mason County of additional $95,000. This RFP will cover both Thurston and Mason counties. Some of the key elements of this particular proposal will focus on education and personal safety, to provide services that assist individuals with developmental disabilities in achieving personal goals. Community inclusion to better engage with and support rural and special needs communities to ensure that people are connected, supportive, and included. Personal growth and advocacy, which includes skill building to find living wage employment and assistance to achieve independence. The proposals, if you agree to issue the request for proposals, will be reviewed by a panel that is composed by professionals in the developmental disability field and community members who have knowledge of our community needs regarding those individuals with developmental disabilities. The result of that review will, this committee will bring a set of proposals for you to award those grants down the road. And Jennifer is here to answer any questions if you have any.
Any questions? No? Good, thank you. Item number 5 is our community planning, economic development, setting a public hearing.
Yeah, for your consideration, this is for you to consider setting a public hearing for October 15, 2018 at 5:30 in the afternoon here at the courthouse building number 1. And this is related to the update of the comprehensive plan. The comprehensive plan is a long-term vision of Thurston County looking ahead to set direction for the county's growth over the next 20 years. The comprehensive plan at this point is being considered only the core items are part of the periodic update process pursuant RCW 3670A.130. On September 4th, as well as on September 12th, the Board of County Commissioners here held a briefing on both the 2019 Comprehensive Plan Periodic Update core items. The Planning Commission held 17 work sessions between 2018 and 2019, and the core items for the update. And also, the Planning Commission held a public hearing on July 10th, 2018 to take public testimony on the proposed amendments. The Planning Commission's recommended approval as presented to you on August 7, 2018 on the core elements of the comprehensive plan by unanimous vote of 8-0. In Maya Tipple, the social planner, is present here. We have any additional questions related to this public hearing?
Questions?
No, we went through this at our briefing last week, and I'm satisfied with that.
Okay. Questions? All right. Thanks
Thank
for
you.
being here anyway, Maya. Thank you. That takes us all the way to agenda item number 6, County Manager update. And we'll share on our stuff and move on to the County Manager's report.
Yep. And I will walk you through your combined upcoming schedule.
Okay. And then we will adjourn. Wow.
There's a short agenda for this afternoon.
Wow. So at home, if you're keeping up with the rapid pace of this meeting here, now we're moving to the agenda, draft agenda for September 24th, next Tuesday. We'll call the meeting to order, and the Pledge of Allegiance will be led by Commissioner Menser, and we'll do the approval of the agenda and the meeting minutes from today. And the first presentation is a proclamation for Civility and Conflict Resolution Month.
If I may.
Yes, you may.
Going back to today's agenda, you may recall last week you had an item for you to consider implementation of House Bill 1406. And I took that out because I have been working with the cities of Olympia, Tumwater, and Lacey. The prosecuting attorneys and Elizabeth Petridge met with the city attorney from Olympia, and they both agree that perhaps it was prudent for the city of Olympia to consider rescinding the action they took and allow the county to go ahead and implement that action. I have been had conversations with Tumwater, and I believe Elizabeth is going to reach out to the city attorney on those same terms. The city of Tumwater has made the resolution effective January 1st, 2020, and I don't know if that will be viable, doable, feasible for the county to exercise that option. Just for the public's perspective, the conversation last week was related to the cap, related to this particular legislation. If the county was to go first, then the cap is set at a high level. That will be the sales tax as stated in 2019. So if the cities were to take action first, that cap is reduced significantly. Just to give you an example, if the city of Olympia continues with the same resolution, the cap for the county will be a change from the $800,000 cap to just about $385,000 cap. It is a significant difference. We may not see the impact in the next 2 years because the revenue will be the same, but I think will be the impact in the next 20 years when the economy recovers and have a higher sales tax, and then the county will be limited to the lower cap. So the city of Olympia, I believe, is going to bring this matter to the city council on September 24th next week, and that is the reason why I took this item out of your agenda, just to give the cities a little time to exercise their action.
And I'm encouraged with my conversations with a few members in Olympia that they were considering doing that, and I applaud that step. And I would hope Tumwater is able to do the same.
Yeah, and just having a conversation with city managers is a brand new law, and everyone's trying to do the best they can to their jurisdiction. So it was just a little bit of a misstep. I don't think it was anything, in purpose. It was just a matter of how they see their actions be taken. But I'm very glad that at least we have a path forward as to how we can probably exercise this option.
Well, and I'll get to you guys. My guess is the misstep is at the state level. The state implements it with a hard deadline. You may take or must take action by a certain date, but they give the Attorney General upwards of a year to interpret what all that means.
Yeah, I was
So thank
reading,
you for the help.
I was reading the minutes of the Regional Housing Council meeting from August 22nd, where it was discussed that this is what we think, but it's the Department of Revenue guidance hasn't been released yet, which is what Tom described at our meeting
Right.
last week. So there really couldn't have been any bad intent, even if there had wanted there to have been, because there wasn't that final explanation of how this cap works.
Right.
And what I'm understanding from your comments is that the way that was described by Tom is still our understanding of how that cap
It's
works.
still the understanding, I believe, between the attorneys here from the county, the city of Olympia. They agree on the concept of the cap. There's have an effect to counties, not necessarily to cities, because the cities is the setup, but the action they've taken.
Right. It won't affect us now, and theoretically, it might never affect us, but it's likely to affect us in the
But,
future,
yeah,
over
yeah.
time, toward the end of the 20 years.
Chances are, because
It's possible.
population grows and sales taxes grows along with it, and by having a lower cap, the county will not be able to access the additional revenue.
Yeah. Commissioner?
I guess just because we're talking taxes, I just want to reassure the public that this is not any new taxes.
Thank
This
you,
is,
Commissioner.
Just
Yeah.
to make sure that they understand that we're not imposing new taxes in any way, shape, or form.
Thank you, Commissioner. The House Bill 1604, what it did is
1406.
1406. Sorry. 1406. What allows is for local jurisdictions to access a portion of the sales tax without having to increase sales tax to any citizens. So it's really the state who's going to take less for the next 20 years. And then thank you for the clarification.
With a designated purpose.
It's really to focus on affordable housing.
Right.
We cannot use to on homeless response, that cannot be used for that. But certainly, if we look in terms of the different phases of addressing homelessness, affordable housing perhaps is at the tail end of it. Mm-hmm. There is I believe there is a desire to have there's revenues be having more dedicated as a regional level, and myself, I encouraged by the willingness of the different jurisdictions to have that regional conversation as we move along, because there is not much money, but if we combine all the efforts, I think we can do much more.
Well, thank you for injecting that, the update on the information regarding the other cities. And that's a perfect segue into the Civility and Conflict Resolution Month.
Yeah, for your
Proclamation.
consideration, that's on back to the agenda of September 24th. The item that you have before you is for you to have a proclamation related to the month of October is Civility and Conflict Resolution. Members of the Conflict Resolution Commission will be present for you to have a conversation with them, and they will give a short presentation as to what that really means.
Any questions? As members of the DRC?
Yeah.
Okay. And then we have an opportunity for the public to address the board. We're aware of anything that might come up next week?
Nothing that I have in mind,
Okay.
or at least that I've heard.
County manager's update, that will follow.
I will follow up with any public testimony that you might receive this afternoon.
And then we have agenda item number 3, consent items A through D. Mm-hmm. And the first one is the treasurer authorizing of a tax title property via public auction.
Yes, that as you may recall, the Board of County Commissioners authorized the treasurer to dispose of tax title properties. And there is a couple of steps that need to go through it. And one is going through a foreclosure action to surplus all those properties. And the next step is usually a private sale, which you have exercised your action, your approval in a couple of occasions the last 2 months. And the next step after a foreclosure action is what we call is a bidding process. And this is a request related to a bidding process because this particular property is 1.4 acres and is located, let me pass you a map.
sir.
This property is located in the Cooper Point area. And again, it's 1.4 acres. And the treasurer's office, in consultation with the CPED department, have concluded that perhaps this is a buildable lot.
Unbuildable?
Buildable.
Buildable.
And that is the reason why they're going through this, what they call the bid process, which is via public auction. And that is allowed under RCW 3635-120. Although there's buildable, this lot is encumbered by wetlands, and the soils are a little bit soft, and they have also some slopes. But still, we believe, or the treasurers believe, that is a buildable lot. That's the reason why they're going through this auction process. The initial bid for this particular parcel is going to be $28,200 plus associated fees. And the associated fees will be the additional excise tax for $10. Everything amounts to a total of $28,864 as an initial bid amount. And again, the treasurer is asking for you to authorize going through this bid process in a public auction and see if we can have this property going back to the tax rolls. This property has been in the tax title status since 1984. So it's been a while since this property has been in the tax title status.
Any questions?
Does the assessor have a value on this property? Is there an assessed value that attaches to it?
Well, the assessed value is based on what the assessor has, and that is probably, they came up with a $28,000 initial bid process.
Oh, okay, so that's not a bid we've received.
No. This is the initial bid.
I
The
see.
bottom
So this
line.
is the bottom line. And then during the public auction, then
gotcha.
anybody can bid beyond that. But that's the minimum the county is going to sell this property for.
I got you.
Commissioner?
How many acres again?
1.38. Let me see that.
That was my question.
Let me give you the right number. Is 1.38, just about 1.4 acres.
Because of the proximity along Cooper Point, is there any consideration, maybe a fire department, I don't know, fire station, any public usage that might be more applicable to? Has that been looked into at all?
So the process in surplus and property is very prescriptive, and this is the next step. And I believe if the treasurer doesn't receive a good bid, then maybe exploring different options.
Well, I don't know if I like going along with the bureaucratic process of the way it should be or the way it's always been done. I don't know anything about this property, but the area where it's located at is a ways out from any other fire service that I'm aware of. I just mentioned fire because response time and such. I'm just thinking of the future. We've had it since '84. Let's not get in a hurry about selling it without making sure there isn't some public benefit that hasn't been overlooked. That's all I'm concerned about.
Anything? Because my mind's churning.
Yeah, I mean, it's a good spot, and it's a, I mean, you're telling me it's buildable, but you're telling me it's got wetlands. So I mean, it gets like, I guess the question is how buildable? You know, is there one tiny spot where you could put something really small, or is there enough flexibility?
Most likely it's going to be room for a small residence.
That's what I was looking at, because the fire department, they spread out, and I don't know how much area is locked in. And on the other hand, if I looked at Olympia or Lacey or even Tumwater, oh, maybe a park. But we can't support the parks we have personnel, so I'm okay with it. Any further comment?
What's your suggestion?
Well, I don't, but this is new to me. I've never heard anything about this. I've seen government make mistakes in the past, and I like to make sure we don't make mistakes. So I wouldn't mind driving by there myself, but I also wouldn't mind hearing a little more about this whole process. If nobody's even talked to anybody on the fire department about this whole thing, yes, they can maybe bid on it or something, but why let it get away so we get $30,000? You know, I don't know what that is, 1/10 of 1% of our budget or something like that, but it's not, I mean, it's a lot, but in the scheme of things, it's not too much. And I just think that we should always be cautious when making a final decision. And when you put something up like this for sale and it gets sold, it's a final decision. And then the fire department comes along and, well, I didn't know about this. Or, yes, they could look at the advertisement, but who sits there and looks at those? You ever take a look at the legal notices in the paper? You know, it's hard to follow what's coming up. So I'm just not in a hurry to move forward on this. I'm not saying I'm against it by any stretch of the imagination. I just think we need to take a look at it. And I use fire only because that comes to mind right off the bat. You know,
This area is served by, I want to say, Black Lake, McLean, down south of Harrison, Mud Bay. So. Yeah, every other tax title we've had since I've been here has been some weird shape.
Yeah, just
you
small
know,
strips.
trying unbuilt. It hasn't been an acre and a half on Cooper Point Road. So.
Yeah, this is the first one, I believe, in the last couple of years that has been a buildable lot.
So if there's an opportunity to get more information, I'm with you.
is there a reason to have a rush? I mean,
No, it's for next week.
No reason at all.
It's for next week's
I know, but
meeting.
I mean, why do we need to be in a rush on this? We got plenty of time to do it, right?
I cannot answer why. I'm just responsive to the
I know,
treasurer's request
but-
to put this in front of you.
Yeah.
I mean, I just don't see a rush.
I'm not sure they're, just because it's on the agenda doesn't mean, oh my God, there's a deadline, there's a rush. It's just being brought to us, and after 35 years of this sitting on the tax roll, maybe that's where we're dragging our feet and not taking advantage of a situation.
So what I can do is probably, if you're okay, let me reach out to the treasurer and get additional information. I will bring that additional information for you next Tuesday when you review this agenda again. And if that time, if the board doesn't feel comfortable with the information that I provide, then you can take it off or not.
Well, okay, the other thing is you made mention of some process that maybe we're not supposed to talk to the fire department or something. I don't know. I mean, it isn't like we're going out trying to give a citizen an upper hand on a particular purchase. I want to talk to the fire department. So if you're telling me I can't, then I want to talk to my attorney and find out why I can't.
No, I'm not sending you.
Okay, good enough.
Good grief, we're getting into conflict resolution here.
Well, I just don't want to be in a rush.
I didn't state that you couldn't talk with the fire department.
I know, but there's.
I was
Well, I haven't
suggesting-
heard that, and I wondered, did I miss that? Where you told me you couldn't talk to a fire department?
I was
there was a
suggesting
process to follow.
I was suggesting for me to reach out to the treasurer to see if they have reached out to the fire department.
Yeah.
And I will bring that information to you. Whether you like to reach out to the on your own, the fire departments, certainly that's within your purview.
Okay, then we're moving on to 3. So we're going to remove that from the,
I would opt to.
Consent then.
I would opt to remove that for now.
you okay with removing it then?
Yeah, I'm okay with removing it.
It's gone for next week.
Just, this is for next week.
Right, it's for next week, yeah. 3B, Public Works, decrease ER&R petty cash fund.
Yeah, this is a request from Public Works. They have a petty cash of $500, and this is on the ER&R Operations Fund. based on the electronic transactions they proceed and they change how those transactions are operated. It is a request to reduce this petty cash account by $400 to have only $100 in this petty cash. It seems to be a little bit of small amounts, but you as a legislative authority is the only one who can authorize those petty cash accounts.
Okay.
And the $400 goes where?
No, it just goes into the road fund in this case.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, under the fund.
For public works.
It's just about having cash on this. There's not a need to have that much cash.
Any other questions? Anything? Okay. 3C, remove agricultural advisory committee member.
Yeah, you had a discussion just last week, and you received some feedback from the Agricultural Advisory Committee that perhaps Mr. Scott Vaughn, who was appointed to this committee, has been absent for the last few months. They have not been attending any of the meetings. So the request by the committee is for you to consider removing Mr. Scott Vaughn from the Agriculture Advisory Committee.
You say a few months, it wasn't a couple or a few, it was like
No,
several
it's been a
months.
few months, yeah.
And no response?
No response. no.
Okay. Any questions or comments on that?
I'm curious, he's missed a couple of meetings or
No,
a
no,
lot
no.
of meetings?
He's missed for months, I believe. and
Many months.
I remember
8
like
months.
7 or something.
8 months.
8
Yeah,
months.
okay, so
8
that's,
months.
okay, I just wanted to clarify that we're not getting hasty there.
And we had, I remember there was an email from the chair,
Right.
and,
Chair and from staff.
right, that was the chair and, yeah, okay, I'm good.
And non-responsive to email and phone and such. So any other comments on it?
No, I'm good.
You okay with that?
I guess I am, is that what we're gonna
Standing
put
by.
in there as a reason? I mean, as unexcused absence, is that kind of normally, we usually stick something in there, do we? Do we usually put a reason in when we're removing somebody like that they're crabby, they're late for meetings or whatever they are?
This is a suggestion by staff.
I just don't want to set a precedence that might be, cause a problem.
It's just to give the public the reasons why, but if you don't feel comfortable, we can take that
I'm
out.
just wondering, do we set a precedence or whatever? And how have we normally done it in the past?
I guess the question being asked, though, Romero, is do we put something in the file that says removed for cause or removed for absenteeism?
Well, in the file
just
is
say removed.
in the file is in the email that you received, which led you to this proposal.
Mm-hmm.
So all that is part of the file. The advisory
All the
committee
history.
suggested to you that he has not been attending the meetings for 8 months. But if you need additional information in here or somewhere else, we can certainly accommodate that.
No,
I don't.
I don't need any either. I'm just wondering about setting precedents for future activities that, sometimes you put a reason in, sometimes you don't. That's all. I just
So
wondered.
do you want it removed?
Oh, no, I'm asking the question. I don't know enough about it. That's where the attorney maybe comes in that would advise us, but.
Just superficially, offhand, I'd like to have it in there, just so people don't think we're just,
Willy-nilly doing
removing
it.
people on a whim,
Okay.
because we don't like them, that there's a basis, and this is pretty
Pretty
neutral
cut and dry.
basis, yeah.
Yeah, okay, I'm good with it. Just-
And there's documented chain of events, and it's an at-will appointed position. So I'm okay with keeping it. And I'm okay with removal.
Yep,
Okay. 3D is the financial services, the vouchers, then we'll go through that when it gets here. Takes us to department item number 4. Again, we're still on next Tuesday. CPED authorized the director to execute an IA, interagency agreement with Thurston Conservation District.
Yeah, Thurston County applied for and was awarded a grant from the Department of Ecology through the National Estuary Program, also known as NEP, to develop an incentive program to motivate voluntary restoration of riparian areas. And the county received $36,875. As a matter of background, the lack of mature vegetation along streams can contribute to a variety of water quality problems, including warmer temperatures, lack of shade, increased erosion, and flooding issues, and increased pollutant runoff. And this particular agreement is with the Thurston Conservation District, where we will be providing the funding for the district to do the necessary work under this Department of Ecology grant. Under this agreement, the Thurston Conservation District will provide outreach and consultation services to develop landowner initiatives for enhancement of riparian areas. And there is no county funds associated with this agreement.
Okay.
So it looks like the county's getting the grant.
The county is
And then
getting
we
the grant,
contract to
and
do
then
the-
we need to have an agreement with Thurston Conservation District for them to provide those activities related to the grant.
Okay.
Go ahead, sir.
For at least over a year, we have been talking about problems with water quality up on Dobbs Creek. And I'm just wondering, is there any possibility, I hear from Art oftentimes, that we don't have enough resources to do this or that. Is there some specific reason that we would farm this out? Or is there a possibility that we could actually utilize this money ourselves to solve a problem, a long-standing problem that we've been working on, or at least help solve a problem?
So you may recall a couple of weeks ago, you extended an agreement that we have with Pierce County. And the extension of the agreement included close to over $100,000 that was clearly related to the Dobbs Creek water quality issue. So that money is going to be allocated to determine what is it that we need to do to address the water quality. In this particular case, my understanding of the grant is for county-wide outreach and consultation with the property owners. I don't think we can narrow down to a specific problem. That's my understanding of the grant requirements. And the Thurston Conservation District has the broad outreach to the public.
If it comes with that kind of a restriction, then I think the Conservation District is the proper place to go. I was just trying to find funding anytime I can to solve a problem.
Yeah.
And if we can't use it, because of some, I don't know, bureaucratic restrictions that come along with funding, oftentimes strings come with it. And that's fine. I mean, I'm just looking to see if I can't come up with funds to fix that problem. So.
Can Josh just confirm what the restrictions of the grant are?
I'll touch base with the staff and we'll confirm for next week when you review this item again.
Okay, good. Agenda item number 5, Public Works, noxious weed appointments.
Yeah, this item was scheduled for your consideration today. Unfortunately, Tim Wilson was not able to come. I believe he is ill. And I moved that item for next week. As a matter of background, this is appointments for District 1, 2, and 3, I believe, of the Noxious Weed Board. And I provided you with copies of the applications for you to review, as you requested that last week. You wanted to have additional information related to those 3 appointments. And this is a little bit different. In your attachment, you have a map, looks like this, that gives you the geographic distribution of the 5 districts of the Noxious Weeds Board. So it's not related to the Board of County Commissioners districts. It's different. And the selection of those the appointments are very prescriptive by RCW 17.10, which the Weed Board publishes a public notice calling for interested individuals to apply for open positions. The call for applications was posted in the Olympian on July 28th and August 4, 2019. Applications for appointment, including signatures for at least 10 verified registered voters, which those applications include for your review. They have to reside within the districts of the noxious weed. All these applications were received by the deadline, which it was August 21st, 2019. No additional applications for the weed board were received more than the 3 for your consideration. The state law requires for the weeds board to hold a public hearing related to the applications they received, and that public hearing occurred on August 26, 2019 at the Tilly Road Public Works Campus. As a result of that, the weeds boards recommend the Board of County Commissioners for you to consider appointment to those 3 individuals. Last week, you requested again copies of the applications, which I put a copy in your inbox early in the week. I hope you have the opportunity to review that. And also you had specific questions related as to the outreach that perhaps the weed board went in soliciting applications. That is why I was hoping that Tim Wilson will be here, but unfortunately he's not here. So if you have any additional questions, perhaps you can ask him next Tuesday morning when you review this item again.
Okay. Anything else on that?
I'm good.
I'm good.
Okay. Thank you. Then we get to the county manager's update, our reports, and then we move right into a public hearing next Tuesday, the 24th, public hearing on the Thurston Conservation, the TCD.
Yeah, next Tuesday at 5:30 in the afternoon, you will be receiving public testimony related to the rates and charges for the Thurston Conservation District. The Board of County Commissioners approved the rates and charges back in 2018 for only 1 year. And that lapses on December 31st, 2019, this year. So the Thurston Conservation District Board of Supervisors have gone through the process and passing a resolution. They did the proper notification related to this proposal. And we have also provided proper notification to the public related to this public hearing. And we have received multiple email comments. I have not received any verbal comments, but certainly we have received many comments related to this proposal. I would assume that you're probably going to have significant public testimony next week at 5:30 in the afternoon. At that point, I will have, on normal circumstances, I will have 2 options for you after the public hearing. One is to close the public hearing, and the second is for you to exercise your legislative action to approve the proposal. Considering that perhaps there is going to require more additional conversation among yourselves, next week I will have only one option for you to close the public hearing. And I will schedule a follow-up briefing for you to revisit all the public testimony that you received. And at that point, I will ask the board whether you'd like to exercise our rates and charges. That will be question number 1. Please don't answer that. And the second question will be for how long. And so that will be 2 questions that I will be asking the board after you hold the public hearing.
Okay. Anything? Okay.
Good.
Good. Thank you. That takes us to proclamations and awards. La Bonita.
Good morning, La Bonita Bomar, Clerk of the Board. We have reviewed the proclamation for September the 24th, and Joe Sanders, the Community Engagement Manager for the Dispute Resolution Center, will be here to accept the proclamation. The other proclamation scheduled for the month of October is Emergency Services Department, and I will be getting their proclamation in the packet for you to review next week. Staff is preparing the AIS and the backup information. The Auditor's Office has confirmed with me today that they will be having the Cyber Security Awareness Month for October. I haven't received their 2019 draft proclamation as of yet, but they are working on it. excuse me. And the last that I have scheduled at this time is with the Prosecuting Attorney's Office, and that's the Domestic Violence Awareness Month, and I'm waiting on confirmation of when they will have staff and the proclamation ready.
And that is in coordination with public health.
I was going to ask that about Board of Health. It's on there also
Right.
for November, October rather, DV awareness.
Yes.
So it'd be potentially the same day, or are we doing, is it redundant?
I will check to see if we're going to be doing it the same day or not. I believe last year we did.
Did you have or the Board of Health, but you have speakers or somebody lined up also already?
Yes, we do.
Can you yell out the date for me, Aaron?
It's going to be the first, let's see,
8th?
let me look at the calendar. Look for
October 8th,
What?
right?
For,
The Board of Health meeting.
Mm-hmm.
yes,
In October. Which date are they set for?
The 8th.
The 8th, it is the 8th, okay. So just so you have that information.
Well, and Sue Strong, who I was talking with, hasn't given me a confirmation date. So I will check with her today to see what's going on.
Okay. And coordinate with
And with-
Board of Health. Have we done it in years past, done the BoCC and Board of Health? The proclamation?
You did that last year. In past years, it was only the Board of Health
Board of
could
Health.
take that action. But certainly, whether you would like to have on both, the Board of County Commissioners, Board of Health, really is within your purview.
Okay. Any comments or observations?
On proclamations?
Yeah, on whether we do the domestic violence awareness
As you may recall, last year,
at one or both.
on the Board of County Commissioners, there were quite a bit of attendance when you took this action. When you took an action on the Board of Health, wasn't that many in attendance. So it's just, that's how it worked.
So would you want a BoCC, one in Board of Health, both, or just one?
I would vote for one at the BoCC.
Okay, then. Thank you, Aaron. Thank you, Law, on that one. Oh, yes, go ahead, please.
On the conflict resolution, at some point, I suppose, Mr. Sanders maybe is going to give us a complete rundown of what they do and how it benefits the community, saves the court system, all that kind of stuff. We're going to hear that somewhere along the line.
Yeah,
Yes, he is prepared to
he's
do that.
prepared to do that next week.
Okay,
That's when you have this item for your consideration.
okay. I'm good with that.
Anything further on that?
No.
Proclamations and awards, okay. Advisory boards?
On the advisory boards, we have already reviewed the Noxious Weed Control Board reappointments, or applications. Carol Pining, David Mills, and Paul Thomason. And that is scheduled for the 24th of September. Other than those, applications, the only one that I'm still waiting on an answer on is the Area Agency on Aging, and that's the applicant is Judy Stratton. And the agency has not gotten back to me. I don't believe they've had their meeting as of yet to discuss this.
That's coming up.
No, they canceled the September meeting. They'll have to talk about it at the special meeting on October 7th.
Apparently, that meeting has been canceled, and so it's still coming up, I guess,
Oh,
is the
okay.
best way I can put it.
Okay, thank you.
I don't think there's a problem with membership on that particular board, so
No,
we'll
there
have
is not.
adequate time.
Okay.
I do not have any other applications at this time. And under the current vacancies, you'll see the list of potential appointments that we could have if we get some applications, and I just haven't gotten that far yet.
Okay.
I have a question. I learned that the Thurston County Commission puts 2 representatives to the Timberland Regional Library Board, and there's 1 resignation at least, and maybe a second, but the issue at hand is that there's an open seat,
would-
and I don't know what the process is for that.
The process, I will check with staff. to make sure of who left, so I
Joe
have that-
Wheeler is the guy who left, prosecuting attorney.
Yes.
He resigned apparently last month.
Okay.
Wow, I didn't know that.
And he was one of the Thurston County
Yeah, yes.
representatives.
Did you know they
Yeah,
resigned?
well, no, I remember appointing him, but
Yeah.
I did not know he resigned.
Well, they can certainly do an outreach
Yes.
from your
It's a
end.
pretty
as to-
big deal because it's 5
is.
counties and we have 2
Yeah,
slots and
right.
they're kind of at a crossroads of where they're headed, and I think there's been some turmoil about future direction, and so I think it's going to be a big deal that we get a good outreach and get good people applying for that slot that we can.
Yeah, yeah, anything that you can do to, yeah, reach out. What? Yeah, we can probably have a press release. I mean,
I will
If
work
you
with
like.
Megan on a press release and check with staff of our other member on that board, make sure what their term limit is also, so we don't get stuck with not having coverage on the timberline.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm gonna imagine that Joe will get a couple calls.
Yeah, I'd like to hear what he's got to say.
So do
about
I.
Why?
Yeah,
He was very excited.
okay.
That's all that I have today.
Thanks
So-
for bringing that up.
Maybe
Yes.
related to that, a couple of weeks ago, I received an email from Ms. Jill Severn. She was in the process of, I believe this coming weekend, an editorial related to the Timberline Regional Library and the funding structure. And in that email, she suggested to me the steps as to how we can approach the commission, as to how can this the Timberline Regional Library system can be restructured. Certainly, my reaction to that is a 5-county structure. I think is beyond the purview of the Board of County Commissioners. So I have scheduled a meeting with Cheryl Haywood, just to understand where she's coming from. Certainly, you've heard that some of the financial, the funding becomes challenging for the Timberline Regional Library. And she has been very outspoken about that, and as well as the funding issues that all of us have in relation to the services that we need to provide. So I just want to give you a heads up on that. I don't know if this editorial is going to come out this weekend or not, but first I'd like to touch base with the Executive Director, Cheryl Haywood, to see where she's coming from. I briefly touched base with her yesterday, and so we're going to touch base and I'll report back on that conversation.
I know they were consolidating and closing some of the smaller libraries that weren't paying for themselves, and they received significant pushback and kept several of them open. So I know it's a hot issue.
They have this pilot thing at McCleary where they basically have extended hours with no staff. And they have cameras and things, and people can use limited services on their own, basically. And it's apparently so far working pretty well.
Yeah.
They've got like Elma, McCleary, Montesano within 10 miles of each other. It's three separate. So, and you know, they're 90%, this is what Cheryl was explaining to me, 90% of their budget is property tax. They're subject to the same 1% cap that we are. And their primary expenditure is staffs, and cost of living and increases go up like 6% for them. So they're under the same boa constrictor effect that we are, even more so, because they're even more dependent on staff salary and property tax income. And they're trying to support up all these rural libraries.
Yeah, and that's their main source,
Yeah.
and which creates an issue for them.
90%.
But I have to give credit to Cheryl because she has been adjusting, and she has taken action just to make sure that they continue to provide services on a very innovative ideas like you described. Yeah.
Well, she's a superstar too, Cheryl is. Are you going to have a meeting on your one-on-one, or are you going to have her come to the board?
No, one-on-one,
Okay.
because I want to hear her perspective
Yeah.
on this proposal that I received on an email from Ms. Jill Severn.
Commissioner?
I guess when that's completed, then, obviously we want to hear what's going on. But another piece of that, and just so that for the public, they might wonder why I'm asking this next question, but we as a board are only able to communicate amongst ourselves in a public meeting with the agenda posted. So what I'm going to ask of the county manager is, could you have a visit with Joe Wheeler and find out his perspective about what is going on and what that resignation about? And the reason I'm asking you to do it is because if any one of us do it, we can't just walk into one of our seatmates' offices and say, oh yeah, well, did you hear about this, that, and the other, or whatever? We're just not allowed to talk about that stuff because we can't talk about any county business, outside of one of these agenda scheduled meetings. And time is maybe of the essence here. So I'd rather have you have that conversation with Joe and then brief us at your earliest convenience so that we all three know what you found out.
Will do.
I'm still going to call Joe.
Well, that's fine, but you can't tell me
I
what
can't
Joe
tell you.
tells you.
That's right.
So that's where I'm coming from.
Yeah.
Yeah, certainly I can do that.
So is that okay with the board?
It's all right with me, sure.
Yeah. He bent my ear at the farmer's market a couple weeks ago.
Oh, did
well,
he?
yeah, you can't.
I have an
well,
inkling, but
in
I
between
would rather
sets?
have a full, I don't want to misrepresent what he said, so I'd rather he have.
Yeah,
it.
I'll reach out to him and give you
Okay.
some perspective.
And I also know Joe, but I haven't heard anything. So.
In the meantime, if you can, we will prepare a news release announcing the vacancy and your interactions with the community. You can encourage anybody who can probably send an application. That would be great.
All right, thank you. Moving on to PIO check-in, and I'm going to turn to Romero.
There's really not much of an update other than the award that the county received. As I mentioned early in the meeting, this is the Silver Award from the City County Communications and Marketing Association. And this is for the best of YouTube, especially for the use of live streaming during agenda settings like today.
Okay.
That's my PIO update.
Anything for the PIO?
I guess I'm curious what the best means. Are there?
Means we're doing it.
Well, yeah, we're doing it, but does that mean nobody else is doing it, or very few are doing it? How did this come about?
Everybody
and
gets
what
it.
are we compared to? What's the comparison?
Well, good question, and I don't have the answer to that.
Okay.
So we look forward to making
This is a national application, so I would assume they probably compete among similar type of applications across the country. So, but
Well, this was a relatively new move by the Board of County Commissioners here, wasn't it?
Right.
To do
So-
this.
yeah.
So now we're doing it. I'm just wondering if anybody else is doing it, what their success has been, how they've increased viewership, maybe. I'd like to see what we can do, to be as open as we can be with the public.
So are you asking me to do a research what other organizations have done?
Well, you
to-
don't have to do that, but maybe your PIO person could do that, I
Yeah.
suppose.
No, I'm just trying to understand what information you need from
I
this
just want to
conversation.
know, what are we being compared to?
Okay,
And what's the criteria behind all that? That's all.
okay.
You just pass it on to Megan,
Oh, yeah.
because she and Brian will know this stuff.
Because if you don't know, and I don't know, I'm looking around here, nobody else is shaking their head like they know, so.
For me, I wasn't going to question an award.
Well. Why not? I guess
Good
that's.
point.
No, for me, that's just my
It's
humble
in my
perspective.
DNA, that's the question, everything.
That's funny. All right, that takes us to just about 10 o'clock. We're going to go ahead, before we get into the next 8 items, which includes 2 executive sessions, we're going to go ahead and take a 15-minute break, and we'll come back at 10:15. We're adjourned. We're in recess.
Okay.
But before we say anything about the library, let's find out.
What's going on there?
Yeah, because there could be some delicacies to that.
Totally. So I just pulled what I'm talking the library board document, and it looks like our person.
They're 7-year terms.
7-year terms, which is a
I thought she said 6, but still,
It says if you add
yeah.
max to 2.
But she mentioned that it's a long term.
It is long term. So Joseph Wheeler, and he was up in 2023, and then our
She
other
quit.
person
No, I don't think that's right.
quit.
She said it was, that's not the name. It was a different name. It's in my notes in my office.
Somebody else.
We have another, that's not the name of the second person who's also threatening to quit. Yeah.
That's what that's all about. I would anticipate that they'll decide to make some, this is my anticipation, that they will decide to make some adjustments. Start reviewing, go through the process again, make things all proper and line. That is. I don't even know him. I'm like. Was reviewing some, appellate and Supreme Court rulings. There was a judge by the name of Petrich, which had made a ruling exactly about something of this nature, which was down out of the Oakville area.
Not related with Elizabeth, right?
Oh, I'm sure she was, yeah. He was. So I thought that was kind of funny, and I was still consistent that, based upon that, I was in the right road for where I'm at. Okay. So I thought that was kind of just interesting, that as I'm going through the various things.
Okay. All right, welcome back to the second half of the agenda setting for the Board of County Commissioners for September 17th, yeah, today, 2019. And so we're getting into the commissioner items now, and the first one on the list is Regional Transition Resource Center funding and discussion and direction, perhaps.
Yeah, Commissioners, this is a follow-up to the September 5th briefing that you received from staff, which they walk you through an update on perhaps some of the options that we have on the regional housing council, I believe, which the next meeting is this Thursday at 5 in the afternoon, and I believe Commissioner Hutchins is going to be attending as well as myself and the staff. One of the staff asked a few questions for you in order to provide some direction. And one of the first question was the implementation of 1406 House Bill, and I think we already have a discussion on that. And I believe we have a couple of steps that we need to take related to the 1406. And follow on to that, depending what the cities of Olympia and Tumwater will do in terms of the legislation to implement this tax, then the county will follow up, and at that point, I will bring that item for your consideration for you to consider taking an action.
When you address that issue, could you always say, I don't know, deferring or something, implementing a tax is going to make people nervous?
Okay, so taking a portion of the tax that is allocated to the state. Yeah, thank you. And so it's, also as part of the conversation on that briefing was a question whether the county would like to take the lead related to this particular mitigation site that we have been discussing the last few months. That is located on Carpenter and Martin Way, and that is a property that is owned by the county. It's just a little bit over 2 acres, I believe, and is at this point is vacant. So my recommendation to the board last week related to this particular site, whether the county may consider to be the lead on this, actually makes sense. It is our property. It is located in the unincorporated areas of the county. But also, as you may recall, I think my suggestion to you was with a caveat, meaning that the jurisdictions need to be part of the regional approach. And the concern that I have is the county takes the lead, then we're going to be put in the position that the jurisdiction asking the county as to where we are in solving this problem or implementing this particular site. I'm just giving you a background on that past meeting. And also on last meeting, you start having a conversation as to the level of funding and the capacity the county may have to participate on the regional housing council. And this is, a couple of options that was presented to you, whether it's, I'm going to use this term, the mitigation side, which is also known as the blue tents. Options also, whether you like to go with a more of a tiny home type of village situation, similar to what City of Olympia has in Plum Street. So all the different options they was presented to you with cost associated with that. Let me pause that for a second, and let me allow me to report that I did have a conversation with Scott Spence, and the City of Lacey had a conversation related to this approach, and I believe it was the majority of the City Council that desired to have somewhat a mitigation site on this site, what are called the blue tents, on a very temporary basis, maybe for a couple of months. But the ultimate objective, I believe, of the majority of the council, as Scott reported, they would like to see more of a tiny village or that sort of application similar to the Plum Street. That is the report that I have from the City of Lacey related to this particular site. I believe they're going to be reporting this on Thursday afternoon. By going back to, then goes back to the level of funding. The level of funding that each jurisdiction could participate on this effort. And Keely is going to walk you through again some of the high-level costs in terms of the initial investment versus the ongoing management and operations of this particular proposal. You had a brief conversation, we presented to you a brief conversation of the available funding that perhaps the county could access. And you may recall it was about $200,000. And the $200,000 level is related to the emergency funding that was set aside as a result of the CIP process. And it's a one-time emergency funding, but the question remains, if you choose to utilize that emergency funding for this particular effort, that funding will not be available for emergency basis for other nonprofits that perhaps may need down the road and in the future, in the upcoming year. And again, the question will continue to remain as to how the ongoing maintenance of this will be funded. Anyways, this is just a background, and the staff is going to walk you through the details.
So I'll just introduce myself, Tom Webster with Public Health and Social Services.
Keely Marino with Public Health and Social Services.
I'll start with you.
Sure. All right. So the model that we were asked to put together was a phase one for an emergency response to the unsheltered homelessness crisis, with the very aggressive goal of opening on November 1. So the mock budget that I put together along with Casey Schaufler from the City of Olympia reflects that as the goal. So just keep that in mind. The setup costs are, we determined there'd be fencing around the tent area. The tents that we had identified are not the blue tents, but rather a more sturdy tent called Weather Hide. They're developed specifically for homeless individuals. They're insulated internally and or for hot and for cold weather. So, and they're just more durable than the other tents. So that's what that cost is. So 40 and perhaps maybe a few replacement tents. Pallets, especially where the Martin Road, Martin Way and Carpenter Road, that property, there's an ingress? Yes, technical terms. Okay. And so concerns around if it gets really wet, so the tents would all sit on pallets, so that's what that cost is. And the cardboard goes on top of that to kind of seam it all together, otherwise it would be really uncomfortable. Tarps for further weatherization for the tents, and then we're made a guess around electricity hookup. There's already lighting out there, but if we need further electricity, then we accounted for that cost. And then miscellaneous being supplies that we don't quite know what we need yet in order to stand this up. The other ongoing costs, the highest being staffing. Staffing, in order for this to be as successful as possible, the Regional Housing Council, with the support of the technical team, all agreed that a higher staffing model would be necessary. It'd be a 24/7 staffing model. And I've approached Meg Martin with Interfaith Works to consider which would she be willing to staff the site were this to move forward. And she agreed to consider it. And then I also built in the potential for a familiar faces staff. I have not spoken with Ann Larson of City of Olympia, but the idea being providing a staff that would be there specifically for crisis response, with the intent of making it less likely that we'd have higher calls to service, because we would have, one, trained staff that have ongoing relationships with anyone who's living at the site, and also some kind of crisis response case management on site. The operating costs you see are for portable toilets, trash pickup, water services, meaning hand washing stations, the fencing, if it needs to be replaced, electrical, supplies, and some flex funds. So the ongoing cost on an annual basis for just this very scaled down model would be, I did not do the addition, but the first two sections, staff and operating costs. Starting it up would be about $60,000. And that's just for this type of scaled back model. However, if you were to scale it up The staffing would stay the same or increase.
Can you repeat that?
The
60?
staffing,
60,000?
60,000 for some of the startup costs down below. So the other, or one-time setup costs are 60,000.
What page are you on?
I'm on, in this, I don't have the packet.
Page 4, minimal
Page
staffing.
4 of 5.
Page 5. Oh,
Okay.
thank you. Yeah, thank you. Page 5.
Page 5?
Yes. This, right here.
The higher staffing level.
Yeah.
And when, and the 60, where is that number on this page?
Down at, so down at the bottom, oh, I see. I have subtracted, this is an older version of the budget. We would not be installing a hygiene trailer. So that cost down there of $25,000 for setting up the hygiene trailer would be gone. And then up above, the actual purchase of the hygiene trailer for $20,400 would be removed as well. So that's where the $60,000 is coming from. Down at the bottom, minus that $25,000.
Oh, I see what you're saying.
Yeah.
The 84,000 is
Minus
reduced
20.
to 60,000 after you take the 25,000.
Yes.
So if it's not an installation of the hygiene trailer, how are we going to be managing the hygiene of the site?
We have discussed the Build-A-Bus project. If that gets up and running, that might be a possibility. There's also conversations with Intercity Transit to do any number of things, either providing community vans, having to come and pick people up to bring them to places where they can take care of their hygiene, or free bus passes, or just ways to transport them to places that they could have showers at this point. We could have a hygiene trailer in the future, but the cost to set that up was pretty prohibitive in a phase 1 approach, because we'd have to do some significant changes to the infrastructure in order to handle that amount of gray water and water.
What is the significance of the $60,000 number if it's not including the staff?
No, that's just the startup costs. So I was just calling out that that would be the one-time expenditure. So that 60,000 would be one time. And then
Everything else is continuing?
is continuing,
Okay.
yes.
Do you have something?
Yeah, I got a lot of
Well, I'm
things.
sure you
but
do.
I don't know if you're ready for them or not.
Okay, I'll jump in then. The portable toilet, isn't that obtained through the Port of Olympia grant?
No, that would just be contracting with a service to come and service the portable toilets.
That's just a service on your maintenance of it then?
Yes, that's
Okay.
just the maintenance of it.
But that's still where this is being proposed to get the grant from Port of Olympia?
I don't believe
Is
that's been
it-
part of the conversation. I might not be recalling.
I believe that was the hygiene trailer,
Yeah.
Is it the hygiene trailer then?
was the lot.
Right, okay, because Olympia, they had like, Port of Olympia, I believe, had capacity for 5, and I think Olympia's used 3, and that left 2 remaining. And I think it's been part of some of the conversation that I've had.
I think that you might be thinking of a storage container, so a Connex? No? Okay.
No, the bathrooms, the toilets,
Yeah.
or hygiene. Okay. And one other question here, where is it? No, it'll come to me. In looking at the tiny homes or tiny home type village model versus tent, we're not set up, of course, for that. That would be way down the road. And looking at the Olympia model versus the Conestoga wagons that they build, not wagons, but they're built on that, they're a lot less expensive to bring those in as well. They're pretty cool. Okay, open up the floodgate. Here you go. No, read it
Just
back.
a preface of what we're doing or what we're talking about doing and the reality of what we can do and why my position is such is oftentimes I don't think the citizens know how stretched for revenue the county is. The best example I do use once in a while is that the city of Lacey has 38 parks employees and we have 4. We can't maintain our parks anywhere near the way they should be maintained. We can't even maintain our own courthouse. I do not understand how how the public, especially if they knew that they would expect us to pick up the slack for the mismanagement of the homeless population that Olympia has brought on themselves. 90% of these people are from elsewhere. They're from elsewhere because they've been enabled to come here. And as long as that philosophy remains alive and well, we're going to have a flood of these individuals showing up. I want to focus on the 10% that are our own homegrown problems that have mental health issues, drug abuse issues. My concern is that we don't have an exit plan if we do something, and we have no ability to provide treatment for the numbers that are here. We could probably handle, both through drug treatment and mental health treatment, the 10% that are our own folks from here. But we just can't take care of everybody else. There is only so much room in the lifeboat, and I just can't see where we can afford to do any of this at this point in time, because if we take a certain segment of the population out of Olympia and put them into the unincorporated area of the county, that's just going to create a void in Olympia. More people are going to come from elsewhere. I often get asked, well, what's elsewhere? Elsewhere could be Kansas. And I mean, they just kind of blow in like the Wizard of Oz. That is the way this thing is going to continue until it becomes not as pleasant for these folks, I guess. We just got to quit giving away stuff to them. I look at this as a giveaway of the taxpayers' money. I'm all for helping our own folks. I specifically want to identify those folks that are from here and have them have the priority to get the treatment they need to stay and become functional members of our community. These other folks, the other 90%, yeah, it'd be nice to do, but we don't have the resources to do it. So I'm just kind of prefacing where I'm coming from on this whole thing. That's it.
Is there an exit plan?
The 5-year plan is the exit plan.
Okay.
And then
those-
elements of the plan, the conversation around this effort matched with the conversations around the strategies within the 5-year plan, highlight very clear ways to get anyone from who's unhoused into housing.
So there is an exit plan? Okay, got that one.
Okay.
And the emergency, or not the emergency funding, but the housing dollars and the majority of funding that we would be using for this transitional center, is it coming from general fund, or is it coming from housing dollars that can't be used for our parks or our maintenance of the courthouse?
No, it's set aside. It's Fund 2163. It's not general fund.
So it's not money we could use for our parks department, is it?
I wouldn't be able to answer that at this point, but certainly perhaps not.
And we couldn't take this money that you just spoke of and use it for maintenance of the courthouse? We just take that money and use it for elsewhere where we're short? We can't
So
do that?
if you ask if we can divert this money to come into the general fund, I don't believe so.
All right, thank you. Do you have, let me get Ty in if you want to jump in.
So you mentioned the 200,000, and I'm looking at the handout you gave me that it's here in red at the bottom. If that's spent, then that's a one-time pot of money. Like there's no annual budget to replenish. So there's no expectation that we spend that on emergency and then it gets put back in through the housing dollars?
So that is of the approximately $2 million of 2163 that we allocated this year.
Yes.
That comes in on an annual basis. We set aside $200,000 for emergencies throughout the year. So next year, when we go to reallocate the $2 million of 2163 for the 2020-2021 program year, we've traditionally set aside either $100,000 or $200,000 for emergency funds. So we have used this emergency fund pot every year out of our 2163 allocation, we've taken out a portion
Okay.
to set aside for emergencies. So this is a one-time for this fiscal year.
Right, so it would hurt the potential other emergencies
Emergencies
this year, but
this year.
next year we could potentially earmark the same
Correct,
chunk.
correct.
Okay, that was one thing. The other thing was, and I was subbing in at the meeting, I think it was in July, where we went over this for the first time with Shelley. I see 4 different green yeses there. Is there, I mean, I guess those are the legally permissible places within our housing dollars. And again, I echo Commissioner Hutchings' point that we're not dipping into general fund here. We're looking at our housing allocated dollars. And are there any creative, I mean, I look to you guys, you know, the ins and outs of these funds. Are there any creative, if we were trying to match Olympia and Olympia was putting $300,000 on the table and we were challenged to put $300,000 on the table, you know, and that's not a number out of thin air, the budget's 600 and something thousand or whatever, what creative ideas are there within these 4 green pots?
So within those 4 green pots, there's a fair amount of flexibility because it is tied, if the activity is tied to our 5-year plan, then it is broadly eligible. So if this activity is within our 5-year plan, we can use those pots of money on that. So with 2163 being the largest pot, we have quite a bit of flexibility in terms of how we spend those funds within this proposal. The other one I will throw out there, it's got an X on it, but the CDBG, the Community Development Block Grant, is also potentially an eligible source of funds for some of these activities. Those funds are used on a rotating basis, so for 2020, those funds go to the City of Lacey. And so that's a potential for the City of Lacey to use its 2020 allocation of CDBG funds for a tiny home village or some capacity of that. Would be potential. So I don't know if I quite answered your question.
Well, so so you're saying that and I'm just throwing this out there, just hypothetical. If an interlocal agreement identified Thurston County's contribution to this place as $300,000, you're saying that $300,000 can be carved out of 21, maybe not this year, but in ensuing years, could be carved out of 2163 to support this, what we're trying to do there.
Yes, it would have potential impacts on what other projects you could fund. But yes, it would be an eligible expense that you could carve out of future 2163 revenue for this activity.
Okay. Now, you mentioned the tiny home, and that was my next question is, might be for you too, because you're on the Regional Housing Council, but like how is, so Ramiro explained what Lacey's kind of thought is, and you know, we haven't really we haven't really made any decisions here about what we're gonna thumbs up. Olympia, I mean, I guess I'm trying to figure out like how, the structure of this site, how are we going to get to a consensus about whether we're just doing, you know, tents for, and then see where it goes, or whether we're actually going to say up front we're doing tents for 6 months and then we're going to work on a Calistoga hut village, or you know, or whether we're going to do tiny homes. I mean, what's the decision making, given that Lacey's kind of come in with this sort of, you know, their proposal is a tweak of what we were talking about originally. How are we going to get to a kind of a consensus?
And I guess that's exactly the conversation we need to have at this point, because Commissioner Hutchins is going to be attending. He's going to be representing the wishes of the board on Thursday. And think about it in terms of whether it's a phase 1, you know, the transitional blue tents versus tiny homes. Think in terms of the investment, because it will be a certain level of investment that will occur in establishing the blue tents and the pallets and everything else. If the intent, and I had a conversation with Scott Spence about this, if the intent is that 2, 3 months, 4 months you got into the tiny home model, it's going to be yet another set of an investment even larger. So the conversation really has to be tied, if I may, to the availability of funding that we have in front of us. So, and that is really the intent that today's meeting is for you to provide, as a board, a direction or not as to how we need to approach the wishes of the county of this upcoming meeting on Thursday. And really it's predicated as to how much the county has the ability to fund this or not, support this or not. And because it goes in tandem, at least from my perspective. Phase one, phase two, how much money is at initial investment, and how much money is on the second phase of investment as well. And do we have capacity?
I just want to say, because I mean, we're not, obviously, we have different points of view here, and I respect that, but, you know, and Commissioner Edwards keeps making his point clear, but, you know, I just read an article, we've been hearing about the West Coast, this is a West Coast thing, just read an article yesterday in the Washington Post about Austin, Texas. You can read that article and you think you're reading about an article about Olympia. It is exactly the same problem. So the idea that this is Olympia's mismanagement is the cause of what we're facing, I think is not accurate and not helpful, frankly, because we shouldn't be pointing the fingers at each other. We have a regional problem. We should be trying to lock our heads together to figure out how to pool resources and get a handle on it. It is not anything that Olympia is doing wrong. It is not, you know, frankly, I think it's income inequality issues at a national level that's creating a whole ripple effect throughout our economy and putting people to where they can't afford housing. So that's my point of view in terms of the overall approach here. I don't see this as us throwing bad money at someone else's problem. It's our problem. But in terms of what the eligible dollars are, we need to have a really frank conversation about that.
So if I may, this is just a follow-up to the past direction by the board. I know there was a majority of the board, they gave staff the direction. Let me go back even to identify a potential site. We went through an assessment with the board, majority of the board agree on this site. And as a result of that, it was a direction by the board to start engaging this regional approach. And this is really a continuation of the board's direction the staff is bringing to your attention. So at this point, we're asking for how the county is going to be presenting options, if that is the case, the wishes of the board on this upcoming Thursday's meeting. Because at this point, I believe the conversation is going to be such in terms of what model the county would like to see and how much money the county is in the position to participate on this.
Can I ask one more question? Can put you two on the spot. And Keely, I'm going to put you even more on the spot because you're helping to develop our 5-year homeless plan. And you're our kind of subject matter expert here, and Tom, obviously you as well. What do you guys think in terms of a structure of this site? Like what best achieves the goals that we're trying to achieve in our 5-year homeless plan in terms of tents versus, you know, transition to tiny homes, in terms of the amount of money that we're going to have to spend to lift both of those, and then the constraints that we have from our funding pots. What is your recommendation for what the structure ought to be?
Well, I don't have a super straight answer on that. We have 2 bottlenecks in our system currently. One is, a huge one is the unsheltered individuals that live in and reside here in Thurston County, upwards of 800 to 1,000. That's not going to just suddenly disappear because the other bottleneck is getting into permanent housing, whether it be affordable housing or permanent supportive housing. So, and then our shelters are full. So we're in kind of a quandary about what are we going to do. Putting up tents in a lot is not housing. That is an emergency response. It is also our reality that we have upwards of 1,000 people without a place to sleep. So I think that we have a responsibility, I believe we have a responsibility, if these are folks living in our, residing here, and my task as homeless prevention and affordable housing coordinator is to oversee a system that addresses the need of these unsheltered individuals, then we have to prioritize accordingly. So I think that having a scaled, like a plan that this moves into some kind of permanent housing sounds great, because then you get to address the immediate need. And then grow and phase it into something that's more permanent. That would be wonderful, because we have needs on both ends. Permanent housing takes a long time to build. If someone, if we have some permanent supportive housing coming on board that you approved for the 2019 funding cycle, that won't be able to open its doors until 2022. So we can start, even though we have something on the docket, we won't even see those units available for a couple of years. So we've got to respond to the emergency now.
Those Conestoga huts being far cheaper than a tiny home, is that something that Lacey would be amenable to, or do you think those are a good idea in terms of an alternative to tiny homes, which are great but are expensive?
I don't have enough information about Conestoga huts. I've seen the presentation. I've seen them. I know that the city of Olympia is trying out several types of shelter inside their mitigation site. They have a Conestoga hut. They've got a tough shed, and they've got one of these weather hide tents. And so they're trying out all these different models. So I would want to check in with them and to see how it's going with them.
I'm going to give the floor to Commissioner Edwards, but first I have a question. But before my question, I'm thrilled to hear about Austin, Texas. And are they complaining in Austin about the people from Seattle and Olympia ending up down there because they're enabling them in Austin?
I didn't read that.
Okay. When it comes to contribution, the county's contribution, not only financial, is the site itself being considered because it has value? And is that considered, maybe you might not know if it's being considered on an ongoing basis, the value of the contribution the county's making with regard to just the land?
That will be, if that is, that will be part of the discussion with the jurisdictions as to how we incorporate the value of the property as part of the contribution. So it will be the negotiation. So at this point, I don't think staff is in a position to answer your question.
All right, you're right.
Because that conversation has not occurred with the other jurisdictions as to how the value of the property can be part of the formula as to who contributes what to this effort, whatever effort.
Right, we haven't
that
agreed
is.
on that. I didn't know if there was any conversations that you've had with anybody from the other jurisdictions as to, okay. Commissioner Edwards, yes, sir, you're on.
First of all, I want to commend you for doing a yeoman's job of trying to do good under very adverse conditions. So this is not about you. This is about the budget and our ability to provide an adequate service. We can give 10,000 people a little bit, but it's going to do no good. And I contend we can give 1,000 people a little bit, and it's going to do no good. If we can truly identify our own homegrown folks, I'm all in for helping those folks get back on their feet, whatever their problem is. And Lord knows we got a lot of problems in this country. So I'm willing to head that way. But I don't see a total package that we are truly headed that way. Auxiliary dwelling units, we've been talking about that for a couple of years. Trying to create some affordable housing. This whole concept of government driving the cost of affordable housing. It's almost just to talk about government and affordable housing is like an oxymoron. It just isn't possible. It's about 25% of the cost of housing. I know some of the groups out there could throw together some pretty livable conditions if they were allowed to do so, and they could probably do it for $500 or something. But oh no, the government's got to be involved, and we all know what that ends up costing. So getting back to the exit plan, how long has Coyote Village been up there?
Coyote Village has been, I believe, it was around 2014, 2015, and that was designed as permanent housing. So the Coyote Village was always intended and was developed and funded as permanent housing. So with the tiny home village concept, some are structured as temporary housing. Coyote Village was designed and with the infrastructure was created as permanent housing. So that was intended to be permanent housing.
Well, as that moved forward, the idea was that eventually they'd get back on their feet. That hasn't happened yet. So when you say that government in 5 years is going to be an exit plan and solve this problem, it just, I have no faith in government doing the right thing. You know, we built a new jail that sat there empty for darn near 6 years. It was all well intended. Things happened. There's a lot of different examples that we could refer to. But as far as out-of-state problems, I agree. We've got these problems all around the country in our major metropolitan areas. But if you go to places like Centralia, Chehalis, Bellevue, Monroe, they don't have these problems because they don't tolerate them. And when they don't tolerate them, it makes life uncomfortable for those folks. So they go somewhere else. Granted, it's very much like water. It'll take the path of least resistance. And I just don't see how taking resources from what we are traditionally trying to do, that 200,000 for an example, taking that away from what its intended purposes are to stretch out again and end up with a facility we probably won't be able to afford, won't be able to adequately operate, because we just don't have the resources. And you wouldn't happen to know what the bed situation up at the Salvation Army. I understand there's still some empty beds up there. So what's that about? I mean, those folks don't want to follow rules is kind of the way I get it. I'm a big proponent of helping the Salvation Army provide their services to these folks in need. But why don't we have full beds up there?
Well, that, actually, I just met with Captain Mark this morning, and he took me on a tour of his renovations of his shelter. And the reason why those beds are empty is because they do not have funding to operate. So they will be operating during the cold weather system. They will, season, they have a contract with us to provide single adult cold weather shelter beds, upwards of 29 people, and we'll be able to also provide code blue or hazardous weather event beds. But they just don't have the funding to operate their ongoing shelter.
They almost sound like they're in the same problem that we're in. They want to do good, but they just don't have the resources to do good. Is there any chance that possibly we could help them with funding, give them some of this money to try and make it work, kind of work together instead of them out there doing their thing, the municipalities out here doing our thing? I just think that we need to start thinking ahead, work together. Yeah, maybe the government, you can't give gifting or one benefit to one group over another, but we need to reevaluate those kind of restrictions and take a look at how serious this problem is, because it is a real problem, and we're never going to be able to provide adequate services for all comers. It just isn't feasible. So that's kind of where I'm at.
And I'll just,
Go ahead, Tom, and then we move to Romero. Go ahead.
I would say it is certainly true that we do not have enough money or resources to fund all the needs out there.
Yeah.
Salvation Army did submit an application this past year for our funding for the $2 million worth of 2163 funds that were available. They submitted a request for $1 million to operate their shelter. Through our technical review team and the process of deciding the priorities for this community, that project was not funded. We didn't have the resources to fund it at their minimal funding level. So it is a choice of how do we send our resources and how do we prioritize our resources to put them to the best use possible. There are not enough resources to go around, so there are difficult choices to make, and so that's what we're looking to you for your guidance in terms of how to best allocate the resources we do have available.
So to wrap this up, what is it?
Yeah, so I'm going to ask you a series of questions because I think it deserves just to perhaps go back to decision-making process from the board. Let me ask you a question. Would the board like to continue for the county to participate on the Regional Housing Council?
Yeah, I think we need to work together as much as we can.
So, and I'm compelled to ask that question based on the conversation that you had, so thank you. Now, the next question that I have for you is coming into this meeting on Thursday. there is $200,000 perhaps we can access as an initial investment. Is the board willing for the county to start having those conversations as to that level of investment?
No, I am not willing to spend, and I'm going to just say, I think it's spending willy-nilly until we get a handle on what's going on. If we can figure out a way to identify those folks that are our own homegrown people in need, I'm all for it. But I'm not willing to just throw money at this problem. At the same time, I'm told the Salvation Army has empty beds because they don't have enough resources. So I don't see that we end up with a solution by throwing more money at it. So that's kind of where I'm at.
I'm just looking for direction by
And
the
the
board.
question was, invest that 200,000?
And it's just to bring to the table what the county perhaps has the ability to contribute to this effort. And I think the conversation needs to occur as to how the value of the property can probably be part of the whole formula. But I'm asking direction from the board as to what the financial at this point will be. The county is in the position to come to the table on Thursday. And you heard this $200,000 emergency funding. And you heard the consequences of accessing these funds because other jurisdictions may not be able to access those emergency funds for the nonprofits. So that's the question that I asked for the board.
I mean, yeah, I wouldn't make a decision until I know
No.
exactly what the proposal is, but in terms of putting this money
Yeah,
into the
and that's what I'm asking
conversation,
because
I'm willing
because
to
the ultimate
move
decision
forward.
for the board is when an interlocal agreement comes to be. That's when, but at least we give us direction as to how we can start having those conversations. So I have the majority of the board 2-1. Thank you. And lastly, related to this conversation is, from what you've heard, what is the model? The county is willing to present this. Is the emergency response, which I'm going to use the term the blue tents approach? Is it the tiny home, which is going to take a little longer time to address this issue, and perhaps there will be additional investment? Or is a phased approach, considering it's going to be more expensive on that as well? And that is my responsibility that I like to bring, that I have for you. The decisions that you make is also associated with the funding and the investment associated with those options. So
The housing, the tiny homes, Conestoga, whatever, is going to be far more expensive initially than I think anybody can afford. So in my head, it seems to me that we would do a phased approach. It's been talked about at the RHC of doing phase 1 and a phase 2, building up to make sure we're operating successfully and things are working. But I can't think of any other way other than starting with the type of tent that you're speaking of, Keely, that's more durable and not the stuff we see under bridges and such. No, that's long-lasting. It's more affordable.
I just, there's a lot of unknowns on this site, and I like the idea that we're ramping up so that at any point, if it's causing more harm to the community, or if it's becoming a law enforcement drain, if it's becoming a sinkhole of resources, we can make a decision and potentially pull out of it. So I think that I agree with Commissioner Hutchings because it gives us a chance to put some pieces in place without throwing in whole hog and committing when we don't know a lot of we've never tried anything like this, and it's a totally new concept in a totally new part of our community, and so I want to be cautious as we ramp up to it. So I think I agree with the phased approach.
Go ahead, Gary.
I guess from that standpoint, recognizing the limited assets that we have, if there was an end date, maybe attached to a particular revenue source that we committed, I could maybe see that's a possibility. But I would much prefer giving a portion of I'm just going to use the 200,000. I know there's other sources, so we could equally divide it out, I guess. But I would rather give that money to the Salvation Army and let them truly provide a service. They're professional service providers. They've been doing it, I don't know, over 100 years. I don't think we ought to be reinventing the wheel and creating a homeless camp out in the rural part of the county, I mean, unincorporated part of the county. And so that's why I am so concerned about spending this money. It's a bottomless pit we're getting into if we don't have a real plan. And I know you folks are trying hard to come up with something that makes sense to us, but I don't see an exit plan involved here other than we've got 5 years and the government's going to solve this problem. Because in my estimation, the government very seldom solves a problem. And once it starts a program, there's just more money that keeps pumping in and pumping in and pumping in. And it becomes, like I say, a bottomless pit. So I cannot support expending $200,000 on this thing just to get it going, because I don't believe the citizens of Thurston County want a homeless camp in Thurston County. It is an urban problem. Unfortunately, they have a tax structure that supports that much better than we do. So I'd be all for making an expenditure to the Salvation Army. Let those folks put their expertise to work and see if we can solve some problems. I do not want to start reinventing the wheel with a whole new county program that not only goes against what the citizens want, but just goes against common sense. So that's kind of where I'm at.
Okay, any other questions you have for the board?
No, so what I have is, just to confirm, the continued participation of the county on the Regional Housing Council, I believe was a 3-0 unanimous vote. Coming up, offering for Thursday, the $200,000 as an initial conversation with the partners. That was a 2-1 vote. Commissioner Edwards voted against it. And I believe the phased approach, meaning start ramping up, as you stated, Commissioner Minzer. I believe that is also a 2-1 vote. Commissioner Edwards said no.
All right.
Okay, you got what you needed? Thank you.
Thank you. Tom McKeely, thank you.
Thanks for your hard work.
Now, I see we have 2 executive sessions pending. However, I'm not willing to jump to those first because we've got the next number 2 is U.S. Fish and Wildlife 5-year review, and number 3, the City of Tenino's Historic Preservation Grant that have been pending for a couple of weeks.
Yeah, the next 3 items will be simple discussions.
Good, okay. So you want to start with the 5-year?
Yeah.
Is that okay? 5-year plan.
And well,
here.
the staff is coming to cover. Let me frame the issue. This is related to the U.S. Fish and Wildlife scheduled review of the 5-year review of the endangered species. So you may recall, back in August 12, 2018, the board sent a letter to U.S. Fish and Wildlife because at that point we were not aware the U.S. Fish and Wildlife was in the process of reviewing the 5-year plan. Through those conversations, we received a letter on August 26 from U.S. Fish and Wildlife stating that in fact they're going to go through the 5-year review, and they put a deadline of October 30th for the county to come up with some proposals as to how the response for comments will be addressed. So today really is, we don't have a specific proposal for you as to how the letter will be. This is just the beginning of the conversation with the board as to what elements you would like staff to include on the letter that you eventually will sign to U.S. Fish and Wildlife, which has a deadline of October 30, 2019. And again, the intent is to begin the conversation today. The staff is going to take all that information that has received from the board, and eventually we'll draft a draft letter. And that review will come hopefully by the mid-October, and eventually sign that letter before October 30th.
Thank you. First off, board, is this in your packets, this memo and then the supporting information? You have that by chance?
Should be.
Just want to make sure.
I've got a memo.
I've got the
What's
memo.
the memo dated?
I don't know if I have supporting information.
I have one-page memo.
It's got the letters.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Joshua Cummings, Director of Community Planning and Economic Development. And with me today is Jennifer Davis, our Planning Manager in Community Planning, and Chris Chapeau, our Senior Planner in Community Planning. Again, we've introduced Jennifer Davis a few times, but let's do it again since we're on camera. This is her first time getting to be the back of the head on camera. Jennifer Davis comes to us with a lot of knowledge in habitat conservation and other items relating to issues that directly affect the work being done in CPED. So we're happy to have her aboard. That being said, this is her second day, so Chris and I are going to be your main focus on any of these questions that you might have. So as we think about the HCP and the work that's being done on that, this topic is related to the work on the HCP, but separate. And so we're continuing the work on the Habitat Conservation Plan update. This 5-year review letter is the letter from the Board of County Commissioners that will go to address the different species that were actually listed. And so we wanted to honor the board and their perspective on some of the items that we've heard as concerns over the past few years as we've been developing the HCP. So first off, I wanted to just kind of go through the timeline, as Romero's done already, but so you've got this packet in your hand. The first attachment is the 5-year review status fact sheet. And within that fact sheet, you'll see about 3/4 of the way down, it illuminates the 5 bullet points that the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service looks at during the 5-year review period. So that's kind of the important first piece of information. So baseline, this is what the letter that comes from the board could potentially address. Second, the second attachment, which is listed as B, is the letter that we, the Thurston County Board of County Commissioners, sent to U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service on August 12th, as the Federal Register relayed that the open comment period, the public comment period, was open for the species that are impacted here in Thurston County. The end date for receiving comment that the Federal Register listed was on August 12th, but it said they will continue to receive comment and review it. Just to make sure that, not to use a too strange of analogy, but belt and suspenders. We wanted to make sure that we had a marker laid down with this letter on August 12th, that we had replied and done the rules of the Federal Register. But our county manager engaged with the regional director, Brad Thompson at U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, had a conversation about continuing to be collaborative. And then you'll see the second letter in the packet is from Brad Thompson, stating that they will accept for review any further comments from the board up to October 30th. And so that's where we get the October 30th deadline on the full letter from the Board of County Commissioners on the 5-year review status update. So that's kind of just this whole background piece. Now going back to the letter that we sent originally, staff has developed a baseline of items for consideration that we believe could be in the letter. And so it's that last page that has your signature on there. And this is what the Board of County Commissioners wanted us to relay to U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service in that August 12th letter. So here's the baseline that we know already that we'll be thinking about for the October 30th letter. The first one is that improved habitat conditions due to updated understanding of regional build-out projections. Again, this is also included in our HCP, so related but separate. And those come from the TRPC build-out projections that when we began this conversation 4 or 5 years ago, the build-out projections were at 88%. The current build-out projections are at 70%. So with that reduction, we believe that conditions have changed, potentially. The second is new screening protocol implemented for potentially impacted properties with observational data collected during site visits. Again, this is our gopher review that we have for citizens to allow them to continue to move forward on projects. And so we believe that we've started to address some of the items that we didn't have in place 4 to 5 years ago when this listing was made. The third is updated conservation policies and other measures that prioritize improving species habitat. Again, this is just further focus on an item that we weren't aware of 5 years ago. And then fourth, action taken by private and public entities to place hundreds of acres into conservation. So this is the private citizens that are purchasing land for mitigation. This also is part of our ongoing effort to secure the Mazama Meadows area. We're still awaiting confirmation from the U.S. federal government that we can move forward on that. But those 4 items, as staff and as the Board of County Commissioners, we know are our baseline for the October 30th letter. The question that we have to the Board of County Commissioners is there anything else that you would like us to include in this 5-year review status letter? And so I know that there's been many conversations about other U.S. federal departments, how they treat the species, the Mazama pocket gopher in particular, and any other items that might be in the Commissioner's head and would like us to add or research for the letter for the 5-year status review. Any questions on that? That was kind of a lot.
Do you, at this point? Okay.
I'll hold my comments.
Go ahead, Gary.
As to the signature page on that letter, you referred to hundreds of acres into conservation. I would like to see the total acreage listed there because it's actually thousands of acres that are in some type of protected status that will never be developed, whether it be Fort Lewis or might be down there along Case Road that, I don't know, there's about 1,000 acres down there. That's that one preserve that is, it wasn't purchased since this, but it's in place now. So I'd like to see the total number of acres that are set aside. Then I'd like to see you folks take a look at some of the reasoning behind some of the issues, and I think I've mentioned this to you, Josh, that the 600-foot buffer, as far as I know, the only thing I can find in reference to that and justifying that is one study on the Mazama pocket gopher in which radio collars were used. And the studies generally showed that those critters only moved about 30 feet. But in this particular study, one of those collars was like 585 feet away. And I believe that was probably a raptor or some other critter got a hold of that, and they only found the collar. So I don't know where they came up with that 600 feet of potential movement, but I'd like to see that clarified. Is there any other science behind that? And then if you would refer possibly to the letter, and I don't know if I have the date right, but I believe it was written February 11th, 2013 by Washington State Fish and Wildlife to U.S. Fish and Wildlife with all their arguments as to why the pocket gopher specifically, I think this was what that was related to, not maybe the other species, but as to why they felt at that time that this did not need to be listed. And maybe you could go down through each one of those, and I believe they had scientific reason behind each one of those points that they brought out that were being addressed, and that issue, that information was passed on. I know scientists from the U.S. Department of Agriculture, they submitted papers, I don't know to what extent, and they basically said you cannot get rid of this pocket gopher. They've been trying for 70 years in this particular area to get rid of the Mazama pocket gopher because it's been a problem, and they've not been able to get rid of it. Now, when I say eradicate, the biologists right away say, well, we never try to eradicate, Well, okay, we're trying to control, but they come right out in their studies and say you can't control, you can poison this critter off, but as soon as you quit poisoning or quit trapping, they move right back in and you can't get rid of them. So I know U.S. Department of Agriculture is yet trying to develop a poison other than a strychnine-based poison, because strychnine-based is detrimental to the food chain in total. And they want to come up with something else that's unique to the Mazama pocket gopher. USDA is still spending millions of dollars, I'll say to eradicate, they'll say control, the Mazama pocket gopher everywhere but right here in Thurston County. And now the Department of Interior is spending millions of dollars to protect the same critter Department of Agriculture is trying to eradicate. And it just makes no sense. I think there's some good information in that initial letter that I mentioned of 2013 that might give you some ideas on what to review and maybe place in this letter, mainly because they do talk about under their what is a 5-year review, and under that proposal, they even recognize that it could be that maybe it was listed in order. I think, how do we determine whether a species ought to be delisted? That paragraph talks of all those issues. So even though we're trying to comply with the Endangered Species Act, which I don't agree with it, but I agree we should be complying with it because they've got us over a barrel. So we need to do what we can do. But at the same time, we should also be looking at the mistakes they made in the listing process. So it's kind of a two-pronged approach from my perspective.
Okay.
So it's my perspective that either U.S. Fish and Wildlife was correct about the listing, in which case and nothing's really significantly changed, in which case it doesn't pay us to spend a whole bunch of staff time working on this, or they were incorrect and they're going to be too stubborn to change their minds about it, in which case it doesn't pay us to spend a whole lot of time working on this. I just don't have faith that this 5-year review is going to lead to the result that we would hope that it might. I signed this letter because I was assured that the information that was responsive to the 5-year review had been substantially collected in putting our draft HCP together. So my answer to your question is there's nothing else that I'm seeking you to do. I'm hoping that you can be expeditious about putting all the super hard work that we've done over the last 2 or 3 years working with Fish and Wildlife back and forth with our draft HCP. Any relevant information, happy to have you collect it and send it along, but I do not want to see substantial staff resources go away from the first track of the HCP, or our comp plan updates, or our development code doc. I mean, I want to see your staff working on things that are really going to help our citizens. I'm not convinced that this is.
There's nothing further I would expect of you at this point. And per Fish and Wildlife, the goal is not to replenish and rejuvenate the pocket gopher to the point where it can be delisted, is to prevent its extinction. And so with that in mind, this doesn't belong in the 5-year review plan, but every time I've had a conversation with Brad, I've mentioned that I would love them until, like the Commissioner Edwards says, we're over a barrel. We need to comply. We have to comply legally. I would like for the fish to start doing or issuing individual HCPs for our county residents who are trying to move along with their process and can't because of a lack of an HCP, because fish won't do it and they're not approving ours yet. And it's causing some economic repercussions or consequences to our community. So in conversations, it doesn't belong in the 5-year review, I understand that. But in conversations, I would love if they would keep hearing that from the county repeatedly.
I'm with you on that, for sure.
Yes.
I guess
Then move on.
I would just like to say that they have never come up with how many pocket gophers are enough per designated parcel of property. And they've never come up with a recovery plan. Both of those issues are supposed to be addressed when they make the listing. And they were remiss at doing that, as far as I know. I haven't seen a recovery plan that then could match our HCP. And they've never been able to tell us how many gophers are enough, how much property they really need. They've never taken into consideration the thousands of acres that have already been put aside for the Mazama pocket gopher. And it was never put aside specifically for the Mazama pocket gopher, but it is Mazama pocket gopher habitat with Mazama pocket gophers living on that property. And I think there should be some consideration given to recognize that these larger parcels, I'll use Fort Lewis as an example, that is all being managed to deal, that's thousands of acres being managed to help the recovery process of the Mazama pocket gopher, in which we get no credit. The Scatter Creek area down there, a couple thousand acres down there. Again, the state had that before this listing. But I would ask that my fellow seatmates, if they have not read this letter of February 11th, 2013, written by our own state Fish and Wildlife folks opposing this listing, that maybe at least they do so. And I happen to have a copy if nobody else does.
Will you just make sure we can get a copy of that?
Yeah.
Thank you. Now, you want to wrap this up?
Yeah, at this point was not necessarily just to engage the conversation.
Yeah.
Based on what we heard, staff will draft a letter. And at that point, you as a board will have to determine how the letter is going to be sent. But I think we have some requests of looking into some information, not getting too much into the research approach, and we'll come up with a proposal for you, hopefully by mid-October, and give you enough time for the three of you to review the content of the letter and then hopefully sign it.
7 seconds.
Okay, I know we're trying to get on with other things,
7
but
seconds.
I would like to see this board give staff at least direction to take a look at the repository of all the research information around the Mazama pocket gopher that is housed in the University of Nebraska. It's not too much. I've read it. I haven't read it all, obviously, but I've read a great portion of it, and it really is enlightening how difficult this animal is to eradicate, and what Department of Agriculture is still doing to get rid of it. And the only place we're trying to protect it is Thurston County. So something's wrong with that picture. It resides all the way from California to British Columbia, from the Rocky Mountains to the Pacific Ocean. I contend this is actually a social experiment. But that being what it is, I have no proof of that either.
So that's a request of one commissioner. I'm not requesting you go and do more research into Nebraska and other stuff. You're overstressed and overworked as it is. But
Well, I mean,
you'll respect them.
I think the criteria identified in the memo is limited to new information. If there was a new study from since the listing, I think we would be justified in attaching it as an appendix to our letter and saying, hey, look at this, it may change your calculus. But to go back, anything prior to the listing, I think is not within the criteria that U.S. Fish and Wildlife will review. And I'm looking at Josh, am I wrong about that?
That's what it states, but again, it's the purview of the board to add whatever information you'd like.
Well, I'd like to comment on that.
What is the date then? Yeah.
Well, this is from the U.S. Fish and Wildlife, this information that you've given us about why do we conduct 5-year reviews, what's a 5-year review, what happens during a 5-year review, right? Mm-hmm. That came from them.
Correct.
One of the paragraphs is how do we determine whether a species ought to be delisted? We use the same process described above to determine whether a species is no longer a threatened species or endangered species and may be removed from the list or delisted. We may delist a species only if the best available scientific and commercial data available indicate that it is no longer endangered or threatened because it is extinct. It is recovered or it was listed in error. I contend if you look at the research information and the study information from our own United States Department of Agriculture, it says it was listed wrong. The letter I refer to in 2013, that's why our own state folks wrote that letter to the U.S. Fish and Wildlife, was to protest the listing. So I do contend that it's worth looking into for a review if it's even a valid listing.
Anything further? Okay.
Thank you, Commissioners.
Thank you.
Chris, Jennifer, Josh, thank you. Moving right on into the City of Tenino Historic Preservation Grant. This is again discussion.
In the discussion, and perhaps a proposal. Commissioner Hutchins received an email from the City of Tenino in which they stated they missed a deadline to apply for a grant. The grant was for $10,000. And they were asking to Commissioner Hutchins to entertain the board to allow them to resubmit the grant outside of the window of the application. That is in just the
Right.
request.
And I promised I would bring it, and I brought it.
Yeah, and so my perspective and perhaps some steps that you may have available to you. Allowing a jurisdiction or an outfit to submit an application outside of the window, from my perspective, is a precedent setting, because there is a process in which everyone has to obey, and if you follow, not obey. But if you allow for a jurisdiction to have, then you wouldn't allow for others that perhaps they missed a deadline to give them the same opportunity. That's the concern that I have for you in terms of the precedent setting. And also the Historic Commission has gone through the review of the applications and didn't include this application because it was not submitted on a timely manner. That is perhaps the concern that I have with this proposal. Now, a potential solution for you that may address.
Can you back up, though? That the last piece, the Historic Commission reviewed the application?
The applications
Applications.
was submitted within the timeline,
Right.
not this one, because this
Okay,
one
good,
wasn't
good. I want to
submitted.
be sure. I
Yeah.
thought you said they reviewed this and didn't
No,
forward it.
no,
Okay.
no,
Okay,
because
good.
those were not submitted. This
Okay,
one was
thank you.
not submitted. So a proposal perhaps that I have for you that may address perhaps this request and perhaps my concern. The applications the Historic Commission has reviewed amounts to just about $45,000 in total requests. There is an additional funding, a total of $75,000 on the Historic Commission. So all the applications the Historic Commission has reviewed, that's an amount to the available budget that we have of $75,000. The suggestion for you will be to issue a phase 2 of applications for the additional $30,000 or so left on that grant, on the funding. That way, then you allow for anybody else who can access this particular grant proposal and go through the same process as the Historic Commission has gone through in reviewing all the applications.
That makes good sense to me.
Yeah, makes perfect sense. As long
Okay.
as it's open and fair, transparent, open to everybody, yes.
Okay, got it. Thank you.
Were there grants that were not funded?
I don't have
You
that
don't know?
information for you,
Okay.
Commissioner.
I think it's a great proposition. Will you let Tenino know? Or do you want me to let Tenino know?
No, I will not let Tenino know because that is.
Oh, they got to open it up.
Because it will be advertised this as
Right.
a open ending, as a new grant process.
There's a process
And
to-
I believe the City of Tenino and others may be available to do their homework as to how the conditions of the new grant will be.
Got it.
So I will not be contacting them.
Thank you. Anything else on that?
No.
Okay.
So the next is I have the planning session agenda for you. We have a planning session scheduled for September 27th, and that's a day-long planning session. There will be housed at the Public Works Rainier Room and the Tilly campus. I have a proposed agenda for you. is a very ambitious agenda. So anyways, I want this present to you. Please let me know, not today, if you have any other items that you'd like to discuss. Okay? So this is the proposed agenda, and I just want to formally introduce to you those items they're going to be discussing on the planning session on the 27th of September.
It's funny, I hadn't seen this, but in my head I was thinking, never put HCP and the homeless on the same topic, but here you just did that. Okay. Any questions or comments or suggestions about this?
Not now.
The agenda? Okay. Thank you, Romero.
And the next item that you have on the public testimony is the letter that Mr. Pettit submitted to you yesterday, and that is the reason why the new item agenda, the executive session number 7, and I believe Elizabeth is ready here, and John is here for the second executive session, but certainly he can participate at the first one.
So we're moving into executive session now?
If you like, or yeah, that would be my
Okay,
suggestion.
let's do that then.
Am I here for both of these?
Yes.